He hadn't expected the emptiness of a restaurant table to hurt this much, but there he was, 40 minutes past sunset, sitting alone in a booth meant for four, staring at a plate he ordered only because he didn't know what else to do with his grief. The day had been long, the week even longer, and somewhere between juggling work, bills, and raising an 8-year-old boy who asked too many questions he didn't know how to answer, Mark realized he had forgotten what it felt like to simply breathe without a weight on his chest. The smell of warm bread and roasted chicken filled the place, but none of it felt inviting. The hum of conversations reminded him of how disconnected he had been from the world lately, how survival had replaced living. And just when he lifted his fork, trying to force down the first bite, a quiet voice beside his table whispered something that made him freeze. A woman, carrying a small boy with shy eyes, asked softly, "My son's hungry, can we stay a while?" If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the magic of unexpected moments, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. It truly helps us bring more real, emotional stories to you. Mark blinked, unsure whether she was speaking to him or someone behind him, but when he looked up, she was standing directly beside his booth. She appeared exhausted, not in a careless way but in the way life exhausts those who keep going despite everything. Her clothes were clean but worn, her hair tied back, her son clinging to her coat like he was afraid someone might take her away. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for help. She simply asked for space, somewhere to sit, somewhere for her child to breathe. And that simple request struck something inside Mark he didn't even know was still alive. He nodded almost instinctively, scooting over without saying a word. She sat across from him, trying to make herself small, as if afraid her presence would trouble him. The boy, maybe 5 or 6, slid in beside her, his wide eyes scanning the table. Mark noticed immediately how thin his little wrists were, how he stared at the untouched dinner with a kind of longing a child should never have to experience. Mark pushed his plate a little closer to the center of the table, offering silently. The mother stared at him for a moment, eyes widening, then filling with something painfully soft, gratitude mixed with embarrassment, mixed with relief. Her hands trembled when she lifted a fork and cut a small piece of chicken for her son, and Mark saw that she wasn't just feeding a hungry child, she was feeding her guilt, her fear, her love, all in a single gesture. It reminded him too much of himself, of nights he had eaten nothing so his son, Oliver, could have a full plate. He had been that parent. He still was. And when he watched the boy eat slowly, savoring each bite like it was the first real food he'd had all day, something in Mark cracked open. The restaurant lights seemed gentler now, the noise around them softer, as if the world had shifted for a moment to make space for this fragile encounter. Mark finally found his voice, asking if they had eaten today. The mother nodded a little too quickly, giving herself away instantly. Her smile trembled. Her son kept his eyes lowered, chewing quietly. Mark understood then that some truths don't need to be spoken to be known, they hang in the air, heavy but visible, waiting for the right heart to notice. He learned her name was Emily, and her little boy was named Leo. She explained in a low, careful tone that she had recently moved to the city after leaving a broken and unsafe home. She had been looking for work all week, walking miles because she didn't want to spend the little money she had on transportation. Leo had grown tired and hungry, and when they passed the restaurant, he had stared a second too long. She didn't plan to come in. She certainly didn't plan to ask a stranger for anything. But desperation makes decisions for people sometimes, and love gives them courage. Mark listened without judgment, nodding as her voice trembled. He knew what it felt like to start from nothing. He had been a single dad since Oliver was 2 years old, after his wife passed from a sudden illness that tore through their lives like a storm no one could see coming. The loneliness afterward had been suffocating, but the responsibility had been even heavier. Working shifts, missing meals, watching Oliver grow without the mother he deserved, it had shaped him, hardened him, softened him, broken him, rebuilt him. And somehow, sitting across from Emily and Leo, he felt like he was seeing his old self reflected back at him. The restaurant grew quieter as the night went on. The servers wiped tables, preparing for closing. Emily repeatedly offered to pay Mark back for the food, apologizing for intruding, but Mark gently shook his head each time. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He simply couldn't ignore the part of him that recognized the look in her eyes, the look of someone holding themselves together with threads. When Leo finished eating, he leaned his head on his mother's arm, finally relaxed, finally full. Emily brushed his hair back, whispering something Mark couldn't hear. But he could tell it was something soft, something loving, something a mother says when she hasn't had the chance to show tenderness in a while. Mark felt the ache of his own son's absence. Oliver was spending the weekend with his grandparents. The empty booth had reminded him of that emptiness earlier, but now, watching Leo drift into sleep beside his mother, he felt something different. Not loneliness, purpose. Emily apologized again for intruding. She stood to leave, lifting her sleeping child carefully. Mark could see she was struggling to carry him, not because Leo was heavy but because exhaustion can make even love feel like weight. Without thinking, Mark offered to walk them outside. The night air was cold, the wind sharp enough to sting the skin, and Emily clutched her son tighter. Mark noticed her thin jacket and realized she probably gave whatever warmth she had to Leo. He asked gently if she had somewhere safe to go. Emily hesitated, then admitted she had found a small, temporary shelter but had to walk nearly 20 minutes to reach it. Mark felt uneasy letting them go alone in the dark. He wasn't a man who intruded in others' lives, but he also wasn't a man who let fear override compassion. So he offered them a ride. Emily refused at first, cautious, understandably, but eventually, she saw the sincerity in his eyes. She agreed, only after he promised he wasn't expecting anything in return. The drive was quiet but strangely warm. Emily watched her son sleep in the back seat, brushing his little hand with her fingers. Mark stole a few glances, noticing how peaceful Leo looked, how innocent, how fragile. It reminded him of Oliver at that age, falling asleep in the back of the car after long days when Mark had pushed himself too hard. He had always worried he wasn't doing enough. Now, watching Emily, he realized she carried the same invisible burden. When they reached the shelter, Emily thanked him with a softness that made Mark's chest tighten. She didn't cry, but her eyes glistened with unspoken emotion. She said she wouldn't forget his kindness. Mark told her he wouldn't forget the moment either. They parted ways, but something lingered, something small but powerful. Over the next week, Mark found himself thinking about them far more than he expected. Not out of curiosity, but out of empathy. Out of hope. Out of the quiet belief that people cross paths for reasons that don't reveal themselves immediately. He wondered if they were okay, if Leo was eating well, if Emily had found work. He told himself he shouldn't get attached. But the heart has its own logic. Then one afternoon, while picking up Oliver from school, he saw a familiar figure walking past the gates. Emily. Her clothes the same, her posture tired, but her eyes still bright despite everything. Leo ran ahead of her, laughing, holding a paper airplane someone must have given him. Mark approached cautiously, unsure if she would want to see him, but when she recognized him, her face lit up. She thanked him again, telling him she had found a part-time job cleaning offices and was beginning to save a little. It wasn't much, but it was a start, and she was proud of it. Oliver noticed Leo and immediately asked if he could play with him. The boys ran around while the parents watched, standing side by side. It felt strangely natural, as if this scene had existed long before they arrived in it. Emily confessed she had been praying for a fresh start, and meeting someone kind had given her strength she didn't know she still had. Mark told her he hadn't felt this kind of peace in years, connecting with another parent who understood struggle without needing explanation. Days turned into weeks. Their children bonded quickly, their laughter becoming a soundtrack to afternoons at the park. And slowly, gently, without forcing anything, Mark and Emily built something between them, not a romance, not yet, but something stronger than friendship. Trust. Understanding. Hope. They shared stories, ones they usually kept buried. They shared small victories and quiet defeats. They shared meals, sometimes inexpensive, sometimes homemade. And with each passing moment, Mark felt his life shifting from loneliness to something warmer. Emily, too, began to bloom in ways she hadn't allowed herself to before. She stood taller, smiled more, believed more deeply that life had not abandoned her.